This is Mr. Oscar, and today we will talk about the most sophisticated trap an intelligent person can fall into. Not a trap set by circumstance. Not a trap set by lack of opportunity, or lack of capability, or lack of the drive that makes execution possible. A trap set entirely and specifically by the very thing you have relied on your entire life to solve problems, navigate complexity, and find your way through difficulty. Your intelligence. And I want to be precise about what I mean, because this is not a video about overthinking in the casual sense. It is not a conversation about the general human tendency to think too much before acting that applies to everyone in a broadly relatable way. This is a conversation about a specific, diagnosable, neurologically grounded execution disease that disproportionately and specifically afflicts people of high cognitive capability. People who can hold multiple complex scenarios in mind simultaneously. People who can model outcomes, anticipate failure modes, and construct detailed mental simulations of how a situation might unfold before they have written line 1, made call 1, or taken step 1 of the thing they are trying to build. The cognitive horsepower that should be the engine of extraordinary output is running in neutral, generating heat, consuming fuel, producing the felt sense of significant mental activity, while the vehicle sits exactly where it was yesterday. Analysis paralysis is not a productivity problem. It is not a mindset problem. It is not a discipline problem. It is a disease, a specific dysfunction in the relationship between cognitive capability and behavioral output that the research has documented with precision and that has a specific, structured, neurologically grounded treatment. Today we name the mechanism, and today we build the exit. I want to describe a pattern I lived so deeply for so long that I genuinely stopped recognizing it as a problem and began accepting it as the necessary overhead of operating at a high standard. In the years when my execution was most consistently falling short of my own capability, not because the ideas were insufficient, not because the opportunities were absent, but because the gap between thinking and doing had become almost geological in its depth. I had developed an elaborate and entirely convincing internal justification for why the thinking had to continue before the doing could begin. I called it thoroughness. I called it due diligence. I called it the responsible exercise of a mind capable enough to anticipate what less careful people would miss. What it actually was, and what I could not see clearly until I had the research to name it, was a failure mode so well disguised as a virtue that I had mistaken it for the thing that made me valuable. I would sit down to begin something, a new business direction, a significant communication, a creative project I had been carrying for months, and within minutes my mind would have generated a complete taxonomy of ways it could go wrong. Not vaguely, specifically, with the kind of detailed, internally consistent scenario building that genuine analytical intelligence makes possible. This failure mode, if I pitch it this way, that competitive response if I move in this direction, this relationship consequence if I communicate it in those terms, that market shift that would invalidate the entire approach if I committed to it now. Every scenario was plausible. Every concern had some legitimate basis. Every reason to wait a little longer before committing was constructed with enough cognitive rigor to pass as sound judgment. And so I would wait and think more. And the thinking would generate more scenarios, and the scenarios would generate more reasons to wait, and the work would sit exactly where it was. There was a man I worked with during this period, a strategic consultant named Dr. Ambrose, methodical and precise, who had spent 30 years watching intelligent people fail to execute, who watched this pattern in me with the quiet recognition of someone who had seen it many times before. One afternoon he said something that landed with the force of something I had been waiting to hear without knowing I was waiting. He said, "Oscar, you are using a Formula One engine to drive around a car park. The capability is extraordinary. The application is completely wrong. You are not thinking in order to execute. You are thinking instead of executing. And the engine cannot tell the difference." I did not have the neuroscience to fully understand what he meant at the time. I found it later, and it explained everything. The neurological and psychological architecture of analysis paralysis, specifically as it operates in high-intelligence individuals, is documented across several bodies of research that together explain both the mechanism of the disease and the specific pathway out of it. The first and most foundational explanation comes from Dr. Daniel Kahneman at Princeton University, the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist whose landmark work on thinking documented in his book Thinking Fast and Slow produced the most precise map of the two cognitive systems driving human decision-making and behavior that behavioral science has ever constructed. Kahneman identified System 1, the fast, automatic, intuitive mode of cognition that produces rapid responses based on pattern recognition, emotional signal and accumulated experience, and System 2, the slow, deliberate, analytical mode that performs complex reasoning, scenario modeling, and explicit logical analysis. His research showed that for most decisions in most environments, System 1 is not only faster but frequently more accurate than System 2. Because System 1 draws on the full pattern recognition database of lived experience, processing signals that System 2, with its sequential logical structure, cannot efficiently access. But here is the finding that applies with surgical precision to the analysis paralysis problem in intelligent people. High intelligence individuals have, by definition, a more powerful and more dominant System 2. Their analytical mode is capable of generating more scenarios, modeling more variables, and sustaining deliberate reasoning for longer than average. And Kahneman's research shows that when System 2 is engaged on a problem, when the analytical engine is running, System 1's faster, more intuitive signal is suppressed. The noise of deliberate analysis drowns out the quieter but frequently more reliable signal of pattern-based intuition. The intelligent person's analysis paralysis is not the result of insufficient thinking. It is the result of System 2 suppressing the System 1 signal that would have produced a faster, more behaviorally generative response, while simultaneously generating enough plausible scenarios to justify its own continued dominance. The engine is not running in neutral by accident. It is running in neutral because a more powerful version of that engine has taken over the cockpit and cannot find the exit. The second body of research comes from Dr. Barry Schwartz at Swarthmore College, whose work on the paradox of choice I referenced in the Smart People Procrastination conversation on this channel, but whose findings apply here with a specific precision that I want to go deeper on. Schwartz documented through decades of research what he called the maximizer's curse, the systematic dysfunction that afflicts people who are cognitively capable of identifying and evaluating large numbers of options and who therefore feel compelled to do so before committing to any of them. His research showed that maximizing behavior, the drive to identify the optimal choice rather than a satisfactory one, correlates strongly with analytical intelligence and produces three specific outcomes that together constitute the analysis paralysis disease. The first outcome is decision delay, the indefinite postponement of commitment that results from the continuous discovery of additional options or scenarios that have not yet been fully evaluated. The second outcome is decision quality reduction, the counterintuitive finding that people who evaluate more options make worse decisions on average than people who commit to the first satisfactory option they identify. Because the cognitive load of managing a large option set degrades the quality of the final evaluation. And the third outcome, the one most relevant to the execution problem, is what Schwartz called anticipated regret inflation. The more scenarios a person models before deciding, the more vivid and emotionally weighted the potential negative outcomes of any specific choice become. And the more vivid the potential negative outcomes, the more psychologically costly commitment feels. The analysis designed to reduce the risk of a bad decision ends up making every decision feel riskier than before the analysis began. The intelligent person who models 20 failure scenarios before beginning is not less likely to fail than the person who models 2. They are more likely to not begin at all. The third explanation draws from the research of Dr. Gabriele Oettingen at New York University, whose work on mental simulation and its relationship to behavioral output produced a finding that I consider one of the most important and most consistently misapplied insights in modern performance psychology. Oettingen's research found that the mental simulation of outcomes, the detailed imagining of how a situation might unfold, has a paradoxical effect on the motivation to act that depends entirely on what is being simulated. Positive mental simulation, imagining the successful outcome in vivid detail, produces an immediate increase in positive affect and a simultaneous decrease in motivation to take the actions that would produce that outcome. The brain, having experienced the reward of the imagined success, partially releases the motivational tension that drives actual behavior toward the goal. Negative mental simulation, imagining failure scenarios in vivid detail, produces the opposite emotional response but an identical behavioral result. The imagined threat activates the nervous system's protective avoidance response, Porges's dorsal vagal system that I covered in the nervous system conversation on this channel, and produces the same behavioral outcome as positive fantasy, inaction, for different neurological reasons but with precisely the same result. The high-intelligence analysis paralytic is typically performing both simultaneously, cycling between detailed positive scenario modeling, which releases the motivational tension the action requires, and detailed negative scenario modeling, which activates the threat avoidance system that prevents the action from initiating, while experiencing the felt sense of significant productive activity because the cognitive machinery is genuinely running at high capacity. The thinking feels like work. Neurologically, for the purpose of producing behavioral output, it is performing the function of its opposite. The fourth mechanism connects the neuroscience of decision-making to the specific experience of the intelligent person who cannot start. And it comes from Dr. Antonio Damasio at the University of Southern California, whose research on the neurology of decision-making I referenced in the identity-action gap conversation. Damasio's somatic marker hypothesis proposed, and subsequent research has confirmed, that effective decision-making is not a purely analytical process. It depends critically on the integration of emotional and somatic signals, the body's felt responses to options and scenarios, with cognitive analysis. The prefrontal cortex, Damasio found, does not make good decisions alone. It makes good decisions when it has access to the somatic marker system, the body's accumulated emotional wisdom about what has worked and what has not. When System 2's analytical dominance suppresses System 1, when the noise of deliberate scenario modeling drowns out the quieter somatic signals, Damasio's research shows that the quality of decision-making actually decreases even as the quantity of analysis increases. The person is thinking harder and deciding worse simultaneously. And in the context of the decision to begin a specific piece of work at a specific moment, the somatic marker system, when it can be heard, typically produces a clear and rapid signal. The body knows when something is ready to begin. The analytical mind, given the opportunity, generates reasons why it is not. The exit from analysis paralysis is not more analysis. It is the restoration of access to the signal the analysis has been suppressing. There is also critical research here from Dr. Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia, whose work on what he calls the introspection illusion found that people who spend more time analyzing their own thinking before making decisions are not more accurate in their self-assessments. They are more confident and less accurate. The analysis produces the felt sense of thoroughness without the actual epistemic benefit thoroughness is supposed to deliver. Wilson's research showed that for a wide range of decisions and performance situations, people who acted on their initial considered response outperformed people who engaged in extended deliberation before acting, not because the initial response was more intelligent, because the extended deliberation introduced noise, additional cognitive variables that complicated rather than clarified the decision, without adding proportional information value. The analysis is not making the intelligent person more prepared to act. It is making them more convinced that they need to continue analyzing. Here is the practical framework, built specifically for the analysis paralytic, not the generic overthinking advice that assumes the problem is simply thinking too much, but a structure that addresses the specific neurological and cognitive mechanisms the research identifies. The first intervention addresses Kahneman's System 2 dominance problem directly. It is what I call a 2-minute start rule, and it is specifically designed to initiate behavioral output before System 2 has had sufficient time to fully engage its scenario modeling capacity. The moment a task or decision presents itself, set a timer for 2 minutes. During those 2 minutes, your only obligation is to begin the physical output of the task, not to plan the output, not to assess the quality of the output, to produce it. Write the first paragraph, make the first call, draft the first version, send the first message. The neurological rationale for the 2-minute constraint is precise. Kahneman's research shows that System 2's full engagement, the point at which its analytical dominance begins suppressing System 1's intuitive signal, takes approximately 2 to 4 minutes of deliberate attention to activate at full capacity. The 2-minute start rule initiates behavioral output before the analytical suppression is complete, before the scenario modeling engine has fully spun up, before the 20 failure scenarios have been generated. You are not trying to produce a finished product in 2 minutes. You are trying to get the behavior started before the intelligence that would prevent it from starting has had time to fully mobilize. The second intervention addresses Schwartz's maximizing behavior and Oettingen's simulation paradox simultaneously. It is a pre-commitment to a specific decision standard, written before any analysis begins. Before engaging with any decision or task that carries analysis paralysis risk, write one sentence that defines the minimum information threshold for committing to action, not the optimal information state, the minimum, the specific, concrete level of information that constitutes enough to begin. Then, and this is the critical component that most people skip, Write the specific time at which you will commit to action regardless of whether additional information has been acquired. Schwartz's research showed that pre-committed decision thresholds reduce maximizing behavior measurably because they remove the continuous option of more analysis from the choice set. The analysis does not stop because you have found the optimal answer. It stops because the pre-committed threshold has been met or the pre-committed time has arrived, whichever comes first. This is not a lowering of standards. It is Herbert Simon's satisficing principle applied to the decision to begin, the recognition that in complex, uncertain environments, the search for the optimal starting point is itself the primary obstacle to starting at all. The third intervention addresses Damasio's somatic marker finding and the suppression of System 1's intuitive signal by System 2's analytical dominance. It is a body-based decision practice that restores access to the somatic signal that extended analysis has been drowning out. When you are in the grip of analysis paralysis, when the scenario modeling is running and the commitment is not coming, stop the cognitive activity entirely. Close the document, put down the pen, and ask yourself one question, not analytically, in the body. What does my gut tell me to do right now? Not what does my analysis conclude? What does the body know? Sit with the answer for 30 seconds, without immediately engaging System 2 to evaluate, critique, or override it. Just register it. Damasio's research showed that the somatic marker system, the body's accumulated wisdom about effective action, is frequently more accurate than extended deliberate analysis for complex real-world decisions. Not always, but frequently enough that consistently overriding it in favor of continued analysis produces systematically worse outcomes than giving it proportionate weight in the decision. You do not have to act on the somatic signal blindly. You have to hear it before deciding whether to act on it, and extended analysis prevents you from hearing it at all. The fourth intervention addresses Wilson's introspection illusion and the false confidence that extended analysis produces. It is a specific cognitive interrupt, a single question that short-circuits the analysis loop at the moment it is most self-reinforcing. Write this question on a card and place it where you work. When you notice the analysis continuing past the point of diminishing return, past the point where new scenarios are genuinely informing the decision rather than simply adding to the cognitive load, ask it. Is the next 10 minutes of analysis more likely to change what I do, or more likely to change how convinced I am that I need to keep analyzing? Wilson's research is specific. Extended analysis past the point of genuine information gain does not improve decision quality. It improves the felt sense of analytical thoroughness, the subjective experience of having thought carefully while leaving the actual decision in the same place it was before the additional analysis began. That question, asked honestly, distinguishes between the analysis that is serving the execution and the analysis that has become the execution substitute. And the moment you can name which one is running, the spell of the latter begins to break. The fifth and final intervention addresses the identity layer that underlies chronic analysis paralysis in intelligent people. Because at its deepest level, the analysis is not primarily about the decision. It is about the protection of an identity built on the quality of cognitive output and the specific vulnerability that identity creates to the act of committing. Because commitment is the moment the analysis ends and the reality test begins. And for someone whose identity is significantly built on the quality of their thinking, whose sense of self is rooted in the standard of their cognitive output, the reality test carries a specific and disproportionate threat. What if I commit and the committed path reveals that my analysis was wrong? What if the intelligence that is supposed to be my core asset produces a poor outcome despite its exercise? What if the thinking was not as good as the thinking about the thinking suggested? The identity intervention is a written reframe, done before the task that is generating the paralysis, that separates the intelligence from the commitment. Write this sentence. Committing to begin is not the conclusion of my thinking. It is the beginning of the most important thinking, the thinking that only becomes available through contact with reality. This reframe, grounded in what Kahneman's research shows about the superiority of action-based learning over simulation-based learning in complex environments, repositions the commitment as an extension of the intelligence rather than a risk to it. You are not stopping the thinking by beginning the action. You are upgrading the quality of information available to the thinking by submitting it to the reality test that simulation can never fully replicate. The most intelligent response to analysis paralysis is not more analysis. It is the recognition that the highest quality information is only available on the other side of beginning. I want to close with something Dr. Ambrose said to me years after the Formula One engine conversation. We had stayed in contact. He had watched me, slowly, imperfectly, with significant backsliding, begin to close the gap between my analytical capability and my behavioral output. He asked me one afternoon what had made the difference, what had finally broken the grip of the analysis loop. I told him, honestly, that it was not a single insight or a single framework or a single moment of clarity. It was the accumulated experience of beginning things before I felt analytically ready and discovering repeatedly that what followed the beginning was more useful information than anything the analysis before it had produced. The analysis had been modeling a world that only partially existed. The action produced contact with the world that actually existed. And the world that actually existed was almost always different, frequently better, than the world the analysis had constructed in anticipation of it. Your intelligence is not your enemy. It is a tool that has been applied to the wrong problem, applied to the question of whether to begin rather than to the question of how to proceed once you have. Redirect it. Begin with the information you have. Let the reality teach you what the analysis was never going to. The Formula One engine was built for the road, not the car park. I'm Mr. Oscar. This is Execution Psychology, and I will see you in the next one.